Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intelligent Community, the podcast of the Intelligent Community Movement. I'm Lou Zaccarella, a founder of the Intelligent Community Forum in New York. Today, we continue our dialogue on leadership in challenging times. Last time, you remember, we discussed the challenge of drought and water management. Well, today we're going to take a look at an issue that is also close to the bone of survival for our communities, but seemingly way less easy to identify or solve. A component of the community that is as essential as water, but in many places has also run dry, and that would be trust. We seem to be in some kind of global mental, emotional, and digital hygiene crisis. I can guess for you why, but it would only be a guess. The cracks and fissures and absolute dissolution of some elements of society in some places is evident. And yet, in the intelligent communities we spoke with, solutions are being found. Trust is reestablished and chronic social problems are addressed. This is an issue that we feel ICF needs to look into and to share with you. So for this episode, we took segments of 3 interviews that we did in 3 cities. What we found was that one of them, Los Angeles, the only one of the 3 that has not been designated as an intelligent community, seemed to have the most problems, the most challenges, and especially in the area of policing, which was the focus we took. The others were addressing their issues in unique ways. Before I get there, this episode of the Intelligent Community is brought to you by the members of the Intelligent Community and the ICF Institute in Dublin, Ohio. For more information on ICF and how your community can become part of it or a member, visit intelligentcommunity.org. Our first segment, as I said, took us to Los Angeles, where we spoke with LA Times crime reporter and novelist James Squealey. James, as you'll learn, is a no-nonsense reporter whose beat has taken him to the heart of policing, community safety, and race relations in one of the world's most fascinating, famous, and fractured cities. Let's listen to a little bit of our conversation with James Squealey.
Just talking about technology, obviously the Intelligent Community Forum talks about it a lot as a means of connecting people and doing some other things in the smart city area. But I want to ask you, when it comes to policing, what have you seen over the past, say, 5 years or so in covering your beat that both encourages you and terrifies or concerns you regarding the use of technology as it enters into policing? Body cameras, drones, etc.
I mean, some technology I think is a positive. I mean, body cameras, body-worn cameras have been, generally speaking, especially in cities that make that footage public in the wake of a use of force incident or a critical incident or an in custody death. I think it's a very good thing because it kind of ends the speculation and the reliance on the cell phone video from across the street or the neighborhood chatter. It can kind of put something, not entirely, but something of an objective eye on these encounters that otherwise, when there's either incomplete information or misinformation out there, can lead to, clashes and other only further stoke mistrust. So body cameras are kind of, I think, arguably a good thing, but I'm open to arguments on the contrary. So that's certainly a positive. There's other arenas that you mentioned where mission creep can get very scary. Facial recognition technology costs me sleep on a regular basis, and I don't even report on it that much. So my colleagues that do, I hope they have a lot of tea laying around or something else that's stronger to put them to bed at night. Drones have concerned me, although they have not been, their use has not been approved in as many cities as I would think. They were blocked from use in LA. Ring cameras, being funneling and, Amazon kind of sending that information back. You've got a license plate reader company like Vigilant in California that has partnered with ICE. It's just very easy for information to get zipped out from the agency that might need it to a repository that anyone can pull from at any moment, and all of that worries me. But like I said, there are definitely some police technological advances that I think are, like you said, body-worn cameras for sure are a positive. I think apartments have also just gotten a little better. I know this might sound basic, but just using social media and getting information out quickly. Sometimes that can be good. You'll start to see more community seminars maybe held over a WebEx type of platform, and that will just allow more people to listen in that might not otherwise feel comfortable going to a police station. So there are some arenas in which I think police are being smarter about the use of technology and could potentially, get a slight boost to community trust if they use them properly. But that's counteracted, obviously, like you said, by the myriad ways this can go horribly wrong and fulfill all of our worst sci-fi nightmares.
But I do want to get into police reform, because the words police reform are evidently triggering. They're being interpreted based on race, culture, political affiliation, and a range of issues that probably weren't the ones that they were talking about back in the 80s and 90s in the city. As a matter of fact, I know they weren't. But what, in your view, does it actually mean with regard to your observation and to making cities safer and enabling communities to go forward in a positive way?
If I had to define police reform at least in the context of Los Angeles and Newark, it's historically been, it's better accountability for internal affairs investigations, for instance, right? One of the statistics that has always stuck with me as just kind of jaw-dropping with how, I've written a lot about internal affairs data and racial profiling data, and the rarity with which those complaints are upheld is kind of stunning. There's not a magic number that should be met, but Newark, for instance, and I referenced this data point early in the novel as well, they were eventually taken over or subject to a pattern or practice investigation, which is when the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division kind of starts to monitor the activities of and more or less oversee a police department. One of the main reasons they did this is because it was revealed that Newark had received, I believe in a 2-year span, 261 serious, what they term serious internal affairs complaints. That would be false arrest, excessive force, theft of property during the course of arrest. There's a few other categories, but those are the general. One was upheld out of 261. And this is a department that you would later find out police officers had taken a suspect into a broom closet in the department's downtown headquarters and beat them to the point that their orbital bone broke. Situations like that were not uncommon. More recently, I did a project in California looking at 10 years worth of citizen misconduct complaints filed against peace officers. I think we found something like less than 8% of 200,000 complaints across the state were sustained. It's just very rare that people can make an allegation of wrongdoing against the police officer and find that it is upheld. Beyond that, I think a lot of it has to do with correcting racial inequities, be that from a arrest standpoint, from a patrol standpoint. We've done reporting around the number of vehicle stops that happen in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods in LA versus others, and the data is just over tilted in one direction. Some of it's also just rebuilding community trust. I mean, you see it now when you have protest scenes. You've got people, even people that did not grow up in marginalized communities, that maybe have not actually been on the wrong end of some of these situations I'm describing, that just do not have any faith in law enforcement whatsoever. You've seen this give rise to something of the abolition movement that is kind of the undercurrent of the defund movement right now. So I think it can mean a lot of things depending on your experience, but generally, if I was trying to boil it down into something, I would say it's just generally a push or a call for more fairness and for more equity and public safety.
So what we found interesting in that conversation with James Squealey was the absolute focus on race as the fulcrum on which a lot of the problems in LA rest, and the relationship with police. He's obviously done his homework and has done some very, very intense reporting here. We found it interesting that he did find some solutions that he thought technology, the body cams, for example, that police have to wear, were very, very important in terms of transparency. Transparency, of course, came through the entire podcast, which you can listen to by going to our website. The other aspect of it, though, was the concern he had for other technologies like facial recognition and so forth. So what we found basically was a very, very troubled relationship between the police and the community. And again, not just the minority community. if you listen closely to what he said. So Los Angeles is probably an example of a place that needs to take a look at the intelligent community principles to go forward. Now, from there, we decided to take you to Europe, to Tallinn, Estonia, which by anyone's measure is the most advanced digital city in the world, but a place where 2 decades or so ago, the police were very, very corrupt. Tallinn was named the world's most intelligent community 2 years ago. And let's see if we can find out why, in part, that was, and also how you have now a very different relationship with the police. So let's go to my interview with Tallinn, Estonia.
Martin, a big issue today is the levels of trust between our policing and our citizens. And that also applies to the digital environment. There's concerns with trust, intrusiveness, that governments will be prying more into people's lives than ever before. And of course, Estonia represents the sort of the epitome, the peak of good uses of technology. How would you characterize or describe the overall level of trust between, say, the police in Tallinn, the digital groups in government, and your citizens?
Well, trust in towards the police in general is in Estonia very, very high. The police is one of the most trusted institution in the whole republic. So it's they're much more trusted, like, for example, our president or other national institutions. So it's very highly trusted. It's not always liked because, of course, if someone gives you a parking ticket, you don't necessarily love them. But police is trusted, and it's a huge leap that we have been doing during the last 25 years, because the police at that time was quite corrupt, etc. But now it's really trusted, yeah. And it connects very well to our whole approach to our digital services, because we strongly believe that one of the cornerstones behind our e-services success is also the trust. We put a lot of effort in data protection and information security, and it just makes people trust. And I think the police have walked similar paths in different domains, but achieved similar results.
One of the questions I was asked by people to ask you is the area of citizen privacy. There's great concern around the world today with the degree of monitoring, camera surveillance, and electronics in place, that the privacy of citizens needs to be respected, and we need to find more efficient ways to do that. Martin, how do you handle the issue of citizen privacy as it relates to the digital infrastructure that you've put in place?
Yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward. Every piece of data we collect or process, there must be a legal background for it. There must be some place in legislation that says that we must provide this or that kind of public service, that data is needed for that. So if we put cameras on a public space, then of course we have to put signs up so people are aware of it, but also we are obliged to use the data only for particular purpose and not use it for anything else. And as you probably have heard, the whole European Union is covered with the General Data Protection legislation, GDPR.
That's right.
And so basically every form of the facial recognition is forbidden, etc., etc.
Now, the digital transformation of Estonia anchored its recovery from occupation by Russia throughout much of the last part of the last century. There is a balance between technology and social trust. And again, if you listen to that podcast and listen to other pieces that we produced here at the Intelligent Community Forum, that will come through. when that trust is established, what you then have is the police being, and I think this would probably shock most listeners in the United States, certainly, being the most trusted institution in the country, even though they write up traffic tickets, and most people don't like that. So what we say here is that you can have a digital transformation in a place. You can also have, obviously, crime in a place. There's crime everywhere, and yet trust can be established in a big city. And so that gave us hope that it is possible to begin to rebuild trust in the places of society where it's most needed. And again, this is why Tallinn, Estonia was both the top 7 city many, many times and the Intelligent Community of the Year 2 years ago. Before I take you to our third and final city, I want to remind you that you can join us on June 22nd for the top 7 Intelligent Community of the Year announcement from Binh Dong, Vietnam. Speakers from around the world will gather in Vietnam to examine that nation's only intelligent community. I will be there along with the show's producer, Matt Owen, and we hope you'll join us online. You can register today by visiting intelligentcommunity.org. Registration is free. And as I said, if you're interested in becoming a member of ICF and working with us to develop best practices to accelerate the growth of your community into a smart city and then an intelligent community, or you want to submit a nomination form for our Intelligent Community of the Year program, visit our website and you can learn more. We finished our program today in Canada, in one of the world's top 7 communities. Here, we found something really fascinating, and I think if you haven't heard this interview in the past, you'll like the clips that we selected. We found, I think, one of the most innovative concepts in policing that is out there anywhere, at least in North America. This is a place that overall, I'm talking about the city of Hamilton, is reforming and innovating on a continuous basis. And it is really reflected in its police department and specifically in the work being done by one police sergeant who is dedicated to his community and to solving what would seem to be an intractable set of problems in it. So let's go to Hamilton, Ontario, Canada now, and listen to excerpts from my podcast with Sergeant Pete Weisner.
Let me stop you there, Sergeant, because again, you're starting now to talk about the social Navigator program.
Mm-hmm. And parts of it, correct.
And parts of it. And again, the thinking behind that is that this is a more collaborative approach.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where the innovation is, as far as we're concerned. I mean, we haven't seen it in too many places. So maybe if we can talk a little bit about the Social Navigator program, because the way you have evolved that there, it's now part, as you say, of the basic infrastructure of the city. So, tell us about your job, basically.
Sure.
And the history of the Social Navigator.
Absolutely. So the Social Navigator program is a partnership between the Hamilton Police Service and the Hamilton Emergency Services, so paramedics, and they deploy paramedics to work with our police officers, and of course our very brilliant Social Navigator coordinator, Sandra Kurtzil. And essentially what we're tasked with is to connect and support individuals throughout the community through a referral process by engaging all of the other social agencies and healthcare agencies in the city of Hamilton. And specifically why we do that is to reduce the reliance of the judicial and healthcare systems by navigating those clients towards the appropriate agency while improving the health, safety, and quality of life for all of the citizens in the community. So that in a nutshell brings us to where we were with the marginalized triangle. I know that's quite a fascinating.
Yeah, I want to, I just want to stop because we've got people listening who have never heard this concept before. And they're taking notes for their own cities. So I want to make sure that they get it from the source here.
Sure.
The question, of course, begs itself: how does the police force, with so much on its plate, manage this compounding program where you've got a lot of other elements brought in that aren't necessarily directly related to crime as we would define it?
Mm-hmm. So kind of the interesting piece to this is that presently right now we're talking about mental health, and I'm sure this is very similar down in the US. legislation has given police the authority to apprehend individuals who are in mental health crises, for example. And thus, when there's somebody who's experiencing a personal crisis, a person in crisis, as we call them here in Canada, we are deployed as police officers to assist with that individual to determine whether they meet the criteria to be apprehended and thus brought to a mental health facility for further analysis. Police get involved with, as a social navigator program, for example. These are the challenges that we have with certain individuals in the community that don't have the wraparound supports. And what they end up doing is they become a high user of our service and a high user of emergency service, for example. So they do call 911 to get help for what they feel to be a crisis. And it could be something that could be drug induced. It could be a social issue, homelessness, for example. And it causes them, undue stress, and it causes them to act the way they do. At which point police are now called because there's people within the city are asking or reporting to police that, hey, this guy is in crisis, we need to go help him. So the reality is, what we're trying to do is we're going to get called to that call anyway. So let's just use John Doe's in the middle of King Street, and he's lifting up sewer grates. Not necessarily a police issue, because he's addicted to a substance and he has mental health issues, but people are calling on police to go and react to that individual. And the reality is, we're the only real safety net in place to ensure that nobody's going to get hurt. We're mitigating risk, making sure that the right agencies are brought into it. But the reality is this a police issue? Is dealing with somebody who is experiencing mental health crisis really a police issue? And the answer is no all the time. And there's one of the slides I included there, and I've heard this from one of my presentations, is that every emergency is a crisis, but not every crisis is an emergency.
Yeah,
What I mean by
I saw that. I think that's
yeah,
a great line. It's very appropriate.
yeah, and what I mean by that is that I'll use as an example. Let's assume I have a family member living in my house, and I need to call police, or they're dealing with a mental health crisis, and I'm trying to help them get through it. And right now, that is a crisis. It's a personal crisis in my household, or my family, or my friends. But when it gets larger than something I could deal with, the right people are called in, and that's police at the time. And essentially, every time police are called to a crisis, we turn that crisis into an emergency, which is fine at times, because that crisis might determine the fact that we need to ramp this up to be an emergency. We might have to bring this person to hospital. But there's times where there's very highly trained mental health workers and social workers and occupational therapists that work with us regularly through our St. Joe's program with Certain Coast that have much more expertise than we as frontline police officers have. And this is where we want to draw on the strengths of those who have that skill set in place in order to work with us.
What's going on there? What do you?
So COVID, and like right across the world, as we've all experienced, has added a new level of obstacles that we do have to overcome. And of course, there's larger cities in Hamilton like LA and New York that we keep our finger on the pulse with about the homeless populations. And in Hamilton, we experienced a very unique incident last year where we had a very large amount of people living rough, as we call it in Hamilton, or encampments, as we call it. And the reality is that sometimes there's not enough sustainable housing options for people who are marginalized, that are looking for, affordable rent, or places where it's just not about getting in the front door of an affordable place to live, but it's about having those wraparound supports. We can get funding and strategies to help this very marginalized individual get into a house, but how do they support themselves when they're there? And the reality is, if we don't wrap the support around this individual, what happens is they become problematic to themselves and to others, and it requires an emergency response by police to deal with, whether it be drug-induced psychosis, or a mental health crisis, or anything in between that. And essentially, by dealing with them before they're in crisis, we're going to alleviate the amount of time we're actually spending on them after the fact, when they've been able to have been, wrapped around by the supports that we have in the community, and just not police supports. And that's the best thing about the Social Navigator program, is that we have made a lot of inroads and built a lot of bridges to different agencies in our community that, 2 years ago, people didn't really see the value of what of working with police, and wow, they're police officers and they see that uniform. And it's not until people actually see who's behind that uniform and what they're able to do as a police officer, as a coordinator of the program, or as a paramedic who work directly with our social navigator program can do. And it actually warms my heart when I have people calling me 2 years after the fact, when they were staunch proponents of our police and social navigator programs, where 2 years later they're like, wow, I can't believe the type of work you do. And this is from technically speaking, people on the left side of the fence who strongly advocated for police to remove themselves from certain things, and we understand that, but the reality is we can't, because we're mandated by law to continue to do it. But they see the way we engage with our client base, and needless to say, they are overwhelmed to the point they actually want to create partnerships with us now, because they understand the value of what we bring to their table as well.
So I don't know about you, but we really found Hamilton and the work that Sergeant Pete's doing with the Social Navigator and those programs to be both innovative, compassionate, and sort of articulates the way you would want to build trust between your institution of law enforcement and the citizenry. And so again, as you observe intelligent communities, what you see is this sort of holistic approach to weaving all of the fabric of society together. We've got an awful long way to go on that. We've relied very, very heavily on technology as sort of the solution or the holy grail for this. It is not. Human beings have a way to find their way through the cracks and to do things that humans do when there is no trust, when there is isolation, when there is loneliness, when there is a lot of stress on society, which we found after COVID, and of course, which has been happening throughout a lot of societies over the last few years. So there's a lot of cleanup work to do, but as you can see, certainly in the case of Tallinn and Hamilton, a little bit of innovation goes a long way. Now, I have to remind you also that a lot of little solutions are being tried. And, to quote Thomas Edison, who said, I've not failed 10,000 times. I've successfully found 10,000 ways and things that will not work. You will see that in intelligent communities. But if there is trust within the structure, within the framework to allow that to happen, then I think a lot of these different solutions ultimately come together to build a more cohesive society. And there in Hamilton, again, you have to be impressed where one police sergeant in one department in one rapidly advancing small city is making a big difference with an innovative approach to crime, drugs, and homelessness. So we'd like to thank our speakers for participating. As I said, you can listen to the entirety of these podcasts by going to our website, intelligentcommunity.org, or wherever you get your podcasts on Apple or Spotify, and listening all the way through. I'd like to thank Matt Owen, our producer, for putting this segment together. And for the intelligent community, I'm Lou Zaccarella, reminding you that trust is important and there really is no place like home. Take care, everybody. We'll see you in Vietnam.